The hospital room was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. 6 days ago, I'd given birth to Daniel, our first child, his tiny fingers curling around mine like a promise. Mark and I had dreamed of him for years, his nursery painted soft blue, a mobile of stars above his crib. But on day 6, the monitors flatlined. A missed diagnosis, a delay in care, the hospital admitted fault, their words clinical, hollow. Daniel was gone, and our world collapsed. You'd think that was the worst pain a heart could hold. It wasn't. We sat in a sterile meeting room, Mark's hand gripping mine, as the hospital's risk manager explained their error, a failure to monitor Daniel's oxygen levels. They offered condolences, a settlement, responsibility taken. I barely heard them. My arms ached for my son, his warmth, his breath. Mark stared at the floor, jaw tight, fighting tears. We left with nothing but grief and a promise of follow-up. That night, in our dark bedroom, I clutched Daniel's blanket, its soft cotton mocking the emptiness. We thought we'd hit rock bottom. We hadn't. A day later, a doctor approached us, clipboard in hand, voice gentle but insistent. "We'd like to perform an autopsy," she said. "It could help other babies, prevent this." Mark stiffened, I froze. We were raw, shell-shocked, barely able to process. She pressed, "It's a chance to save lives. You'd be doing something meaningful." The implication hung heavy, saying no would be selfish. We nodded, reluctant, told his body would return in 3 days. We trusted them. That was our first mistake. 3 days after we agreed to the autopsy, we sat in our living room, planning Daniel's funeral. The funeral home, run by a kind man named Thomas, was set to collect his body that evening. Mark and I chose a tiny white casket, its simplicity a painful contrast to the life we'd imagined. We clung to the thought of laying him to rest, a final act of love. Then, at 7 a.m. on day 4, Thomas knocked on our door, his face etched with sorrow. "Please, sit down," he said, voice low. "The hospital can't find Daniel." The words didn't register at first. Mark's coffee mug slipped, shattering on the floor. "What do you mean, can't find him?" I asked, my voice sharp, trembling. Thomas explained, Daniel's body was sent to another hospital for the autopsy, as we'd been told, but it hadn't returned. They thought he'd been sent to the wrong facility. My chest tightened, breath shallow. Our baby, lost in some bureaucratic shuffle, like a misplaced file. Thomas promised to search, his eyes apologetic, but the hospital's answers were vague, promises of updates, no clarity. That night, I lay awake, Mark's breathing uneven beside me. I pictured Daniel alone, in some cold storage room, his tiny body mishandled. The hospital called the next day, they'd found him. Thomas drove to retrieve him, only to be told it was the wrong baby. Another call claimed he was at a third facility, then retracted. Each update was a fresh wound, hope dangled then snatched away. Mark stopped speaking, I stopped eating. The nursery door stayed closed, its silence slew. The next 3 weeks were a descent into hell. Each day brought new excuses from the hospital, he's at another lab. A mix-up in records. We're investigating. Thomas became our lifeline, calling daily with updates, his voice heavy with frustration. He drove to hospitals across the city, chasing leads, only to find empty promises. One afternoon, he returned from a facility with a photo of a baby's body, asking if it was Daniel. I collapsed, sobbing, it wasn't him. Mark punched a wall, his knuckles bleeding. "How do they lose a child?" he shouted, voice breaking. The hospital's risk manager, Ms. Carter, met us, her tone rehearsed. "We're doing everything we can," she said, avoiding our eyes. I wanted to scream, "You killed him, and now you've lost him." Instead, I asked, "Where is my son?" She had no answer. Friends tried to help, bringing meals, but their pity felt suffocating. My sister, Claire, sat with me, holding my hand as I stared at Daniel's ultrasound photo, his profile a ghost. "This can't be real," I whispered. She cried with me, "But no one could fix this. Nights were the worst. I dreamed of Daniel crying, unreachable, in a maze of sterile halls. Mark stopped sleeping, pacing the house, checking his phone for Thomas's calls. We barely spoke, our grief a wall between us. The funeral, planned for days after the autopsy, was postponed indefinitely. The white casket sat empty in Thomas's office, a cruel reminder. I began to fear we'd never find him, that he'd vanished into some administrative void, his existence erased. On the 21st day, Thomas arrived at our door, his face a mix of relief and sorrow. "I found him," he said, voice soft. "Daniel's back." I searched his eyes, wanting to believe, but doubt gnawed at me. He explained, Daniel had been mislabeled at a lab 50 miles away, stored incorrectly, and only found after Thomas's relentless calls. The hospital offered no apology, just a curt confirmation. Thomas was adamant, the casket had to be sealed. "It's standard after 3 weeks, he said, hesitating. "The autopsy, it's not something you'd want to see." My heart raced. Was it Daniel? Or had someone, somewhere, made a deal to close this nightmare? Mark and I sat at the kitchen table, Thomas's words echoing. Could we demand to see inside? Could we bear it? I imagined the tiny body, altered by time and procedure, and shuddered. What if it wasn't him? What would knowing change? Nothing could bring Daniel back. Mark's voice cracked. Have we not suffered enough? I nodded, tears falling. No more, I whispered. We chose to trust Thomas, to let it end. The decision didn't bring peace, only a heavy quiet. We finalized the funeral, the date set for 3 days later. Claire helped me pick a small teddy bear to place in the casket, something Daniel would have loved. Mark wrote a letter to him, words we'd never speak aloud. Thomas assured us the casket was prepared with care, but his sadness lingered, a shadow over his words. I wondered if he, too, doubted. We didn't ask. Some truths are too heavy to carry. The morning of Daniel's funeral dawned gray, the air thick with rain that never fell. Mark and I dressed in silence, black clothes feeling like armor. In the funeral car, we sat side by side, the tiny white casket on Mark's lap. Its weight was light, but its presence crushed us. We didn't speak of the doubt, but it hung there, is this our son? Neither of us touched the lid, as if opening it would break us beyond repair. The car moved slowly, the world outside a blur of trees and sorrow. At the chapel, soft organ music played, a small crowd gathered, Claire, our parents, a few friends. Thomas stood by the casket, his eyes red-rimmed. He'd become more than a funeral director, he was our anchor in this storm. The service was brief, words of comfort we barely heard. I stared at the casket, imagining Daniel's face, his perfect nose, his lashes. Was he there? I'd never know. Mark squeezed my hand, his letter tucked inside the casket, a secret farewell. We placed the teddy bear beside it, a final gift. As the casket lowered into the earth, I felt a scream trapped in my throat. Not for Daniel's death, that pain was carved into me, but for the theft of closure. The hospital had taken more than his life, they'd stolen our goodbye. Friends hugged us, their words kind but distant. Claire whispered, "You're so strong." I wasn't. I was surviving, one breath at a time. Back home, the nursery stayed closed, its stars still spinning in the dark. Mark and I didn't talk about the casket, the doubt. Some questions are too big to answer. Weeks later, I found a letter from Thomas, slipped under our door. "I did everything I could," he wrote. "I believe it's Daniel. I'm so sorry." His words were a balm, but not a cure. The hospital sent a final settlement check, more money than we'd expected, with a note, "We regret any distress." No mention of losing him. I tore it up. Money couldn't buy peace. The question lingered, did we do the right thing? We'd chosen to stop the pain, but the cost was a shadow that would never lift. Months passed, the sharp edges of grief softening but never fading. Mark and I began therapy, learning to name our pain. The nursery stayed untouched, a shrine to Daniel, but we started talking again, small steps toward healing. Claire moved closer, her presence a steady light. I joined a support group for parents who'd lost infants, their stories echoing ours. One woman, Ellen, had faced a similar hospital error. "You survived by carrying them with you," she said. I clung to that, picturing Daniel's stars. The hospital never contacted us again, their settlement check the last word. I considered suing, not for money but for answers, but Mark shook his head. "It won't bring him back," he said. He was right. We focused on living, for Daniel. We planted a small garden, blue forget-me-nots under a maple tree, a place to sit with him. Mark carved his name into the bark, a quiet claim. Some days, I whispered to him, believing he heard. The doubt about the casket never left, a shadow in quiet moments. Did we do the right thing? I'd lie awake, imagining opening it, seeing his face, or someone else's. But I'd chosen to protect us from more pain, and that had to be enough. Thomas sent a Christmas card, a photo of his own son, with a note, "You're in my prayers." His kindness stayed with me, a reminder of humanity amid chaos. I began writing about Daniel, not just the loss but the love. A blog, at first private, then shared with the support group. Readers responded, strangers who'd lost children, some facing hospital negligence. "Your story helps," one wrote. It wasn't closure, but it was purpose. Mark and I vowed to advocate, joining a local group pushing for hospital accountability. Our pain became a voice, small but growing. A year after Daniel's funeral, I stood in our garden, forget-me-nots blooming under the maple. The pain hadn't left, but it had changed, less a knife, more a quiet ache. Mark joined me, his hand finding mine. We didn't need to speak, Daniel was with us, in the flowers, the stars, the love we'd never lose. The question of the casket lingered, but I'd learned to carry it, not let it define us. We'd chosen peace over torment, and that was our strength. I kept writing, my blog now public, reaching thousands. Parents emailed me, sharing losses, hospital errors, doubts like ours. "You made me feel less alone," one wrote. I cried, not from sadness but connection. Mark and I spoke at a hospital reform rally, our voices shaking but clear. "No family should lose their child twice," I said, the crowd nodding, some in tears. Daniel's story wasn't just ours, it was a call for change. What about you? Have you faced a loss that broke you, only to find it broke again? Share your story below. Let's honor our loved ones by speaking their truth, by demanding better. Follow for more stories of love, loss, and the fight for answers.